hello. Okay, hello. So I'm Steph, and if you didn't know, I'm a librarian. I've been trying to find ways to incorporate the library more often into my content without it being too intrusive for me. I'm just really struggling with this idea of me giving information when I only have experience in one state. But a few of my other ideas have been to incorporate library hauls a little bit more and show you the resources that I use at the library, but also maybe show you some new library resources that you don't know about. One of the things that I really love to use at the library, it's a very helpful resource for librarians when using reference, but it's also widely available for most patrons using the library, and it's a resource called Novelist. If you haven't seen it around, usually it's embedded in your catalog. So when you're researching a book, like say you're looking up a book and you click into it and it has a few tabs, so it'll probably have like the bibliography, it might have reviews, but there's also usually a tab that's either called Read-alikes or Read More. I've seen it named different things. A lot of times it's just called Read-alikes. So when you click that tab, it's usually Novelist. And so what Novelist is doing, it'll tell you books that are similar to that series or that book that you're looking for, and authors that are similar to the book's author. So I wanted to utilize that today, and I wanted to look up like 3 or 4 books that are some of my favorite books, either in the series or just standalone books, and see what they suggest. So there is a pitfall here, but there is a solution. The pitfall here is that when you're searching for a book and your library doesn't own it, then you're not going to get those recommendations, right? If you go to your public library's website, they have anything from like research or online tools, and these are free online resources that you can utilize just by having a library card. So you do have to access it through their website, and you can simply just use the search bar and type in Novelist or whatever you're looking for. Like a lot of them have ancestry.com, some of them have Skillshare, and you can see if it pops up or not. And so my library, which I'm not screen recording just because I live in the same city as my library does offer Novelist as a online research tool. So you can click into that, and that will help you kind of avoid the pitfalls of if your library doesn't own a book, but you want some recommendations about books that are similar, you can just go directly to Novelist and type in that book and it should curate something. I do have 2 rules for myself though. So my first rule is that if on the list that they give me, I own one of the books, I have to choose that book. But then my second rule is at least one of the books I choose, I have to have not heard of, or like vaguely heard of, don't really know anything about it. Maybe I've seen the cover in Barnes & Noble, but I want it to be something that I don't have any expectations of. I think the plan is to just choose 3 books, but I might choose 4. The books that I'm probably going to choose, I think I'm gonna do a fantasy, a sci-fi, and a romance. I just don't know, do I wanna do Jade City? Or do I want to do like Robin Hobb? Because I think that would be interesting to find another series similar to that. I'm pretty sure I definitely want to do The Vanished Birds because I would love to have an experience similar to that one. And Part of Your World was my favorite romance last year. Okay, so I am going to start out with, I think I'm just going to do Robin Hobb. Right now I'm going to use the catalog because I just feel more inclined to do that. I'm going to click into Assassin's Quest. The first row is going to be about the Farseer trilogy. So it's going to show you the rest of the books in the series, and it usually tells you if it's like book 1, book 2, book 3. So then if you scroll down, you're gonna see 2 things. You're gonna see similar titles and similar authors. In this situation, I want to go with similar titles, and I can already tell, I can already tell that I own one of these books. The similar titles are The Queen of the Tearling, The Brides of Maricor, and then we have P.C. Hodgegel, Deathless Gods. That actually looks really cool. I'm gonna write it down as one that I don't know anything about. I haven't heard about it. And then I will also write down the ones that I own, and we'll just kind of decide from there what I'm gonna be reading. So the one that I own is The Bear and the Nightingale, which I've been really scared of The Bear and the Nightingale because I don't know, I've heard such mixed things. I don't know if I'm gonna like it. We also have Dragon's Bane by Barbara Hambly, which I haven't heard of either, so we'll write that one down. And then they have A Game of Thrones, The Dragon Bone Chair, which is by Tad Williams. I've heard a lot about Tad Williams. I see his books in the store all the time and they're kind of intriguing, but I don't know that much about him. I've read A Game of Thrones. I ended up DNFing that series. We actually have 2 books by Tad Williams. We also have Shadow March, so I'm wondering if those are 2 separate series. It would make sense because he is very prolific. And then we have The Fellowship of the Ring which I have read. Oh, we have Blood Song by Anthony Ryan. Okay, so let's try Part of Your World. Similar titles to Part of Your World are The Secret of Ella and Micah by Jessica Sorensen. I've never heard of that one. Trading Places by Emily Duvall. Hate to Want You by Alicia Rye. Love Chai and Other Four-Letter Words. I've seen this one. The Boyfriend Project is on here, which is part of my 24 and 24, but I actually don't own it, but I'm gonna write it down. But they also have The Good Girl Complex, which I'm interested in a New York Minute by Kate Spencer. I haven't heard of that one. The Unplanned Life of Josie Hale by Stephanie Edding. It Happened One Summer. I have that on my Kindle. So this is fun because I actually have two of these on my Kindle. I have The Good Girl Complex and It Happened One Summer. Helena Hunting, Where Sparks Fly. I haven't heard of that one. Delilah Green Doesn't Care. Love that one. Breathe the Sky by Michelle Hazen. I'm going to write down Breathe the Sky because I've never seen it. And this cover is giving me small town vibes, so you know that's my vibe. I'm also gonna click on Delilah Green Doesn't Care. You know, the one thing though that I think is really good about this, as you saw in the Part of Your World suggestions, Delilah Green was in the suggestions, and Part of Your World is in the Delilah Green suggestions. So like, it's genuinely a suggestion. This is actually curated by librarians who work at Novelist. So like, I feel like there's a lot of care that goes into curating these lists. Okay, so we have End of Story by Kylie Scott, which I don't know anything about. And then we have People We Meet on Vacation, which I've read, Part of Your World. We have Season of Love, which is interesting because that's a holiday romance. Count Your Lucky Stars, I own that. There's also Written in the Stars, which makes sense. I actually don't own that one. Meet Me at the Lake. We also have The Girl Next Door by Chelsea M. Cameron. I've never heard of that one. The cover is cute. We have The Family You Make by Jill Shalvis, which has a snowy cover. Okay, we have That Summer Feeling, which I'm gonna write down because I own it. I did DNF it, so maybe this is my time to give it another chance. And then we have Read Between the Lines and Payback's a Witch. I'm guessing the Payback's a Witch one is because it's sapphic, but like Delilah Green is very much contemporary small town, so that's an interesting suggestion. But Read Between the Lines I've never heard of. It's by Rachel Lacey. Playful romance about a Manhattan bookstore owner and a reclusive author who love to hate and hate to love each other. I'm gonna write that down. Okay, I want to do another fantasy one. I'm trying to think. What do I want to do? Okay, we're gonna do Jade City, but I don't know if that's actually what I'm gonna settle on. Like I said, I wanted to do a few different books, so we'll settle on a few things, but we're gonna do Jade City because I just think it'd be fun. I also did a library video a long time ago on my channel where I read books that the library recommended for me, and they actually recommended Jade City, so I feel like it just full circle. We have Savage Legion by Matt Wallace. I have not read anything by Matt Wallace. I've seen his books around, don't really know that much about him. Black Leopard, Red Wolf, I ended up DNFing. It was just like too confusing for me, by Marlon James. And then we have Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri, which I'm questioning a little bit. I have read that. I'm very much questioning it. That's an interesting choice. So then we have Queen of the Conquered. This is another one that I actually DNF'd. We have City of Broken Magic. I have never heard of that one. The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. I have read this and enjoyed it. The Ruin of Kings is on here. That's the one, okay. There's also The Throne of the Five Winds, which I've seen around. I've been interested in it. I just haven't seen many people read it. And then Blackfish City. I want to do something, maybe I do want to do like a little sci-fi one. I am really curious about what they would suggest for the 5th season. There's already 3 things on here that I own. Okay. The first one is The Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roan Horace, which I do own this. The problem is that this is going to be an incomplete series, so I've actually debated on whether or not I really want to read this. So that's a thing. We then have The Spear Cuts Through Water, which I own. We have Winter Birth by Brian Buckley, which I've never heard. Ruckley, not Buckley. I've never heard of. 2 more that I own. We have Master of Poisons. Oh, you know what? I don't actually own this anymore because I DNF'd it. And then An Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon, which I actually really love River Solomon. And we have something called Race the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst, which I've actually read a Sarah Beth Durst before and I loved it. So I kind of want to write that down because like I haven't heard of the series, I've only heard of the author. We have another one I own. We have Son of the Storm, which I'm actually reading this for a different video, so I'm not going to put this one down, but that's exciting. Then we have The Raven Tower, which I have seen pop up quite a few times recently. I've been seeing it going around. I don't know if it's a good going around or people aren't liking it. I don't really know. We have Planet of Exile by Ursula K. Le Guin. I have heard of that one. Another one I own, Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. Destroyer of Light by Jennifer Marie Brissett. Shadow Valley by Stephen Barnes. So this is the one where I actually own the most of them. I have no idea what I would choose. I kind of want to try one more. I just don't know what one. I don't know. Let's try something like Serpent and the Wings of Night. Okay, so similar titles here are Kill the Queen by Jennifer Estep, which I have never heard of. A Court of Thorns and Roses, I have read. Fourth Wing, I have read. The Tiger and the Wolf. We have King of Battle and Blood, which I actually own the Kindle version of this. How to Love Your Elf by Carolyn Sparks. We have From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. The Curse of Saints by Kate Dramis. I just got this for Christmas. Dragon Actually by G.A. Aiken. Are you aching? Yep. For some bacon, yep. Anyway. And then lastly, we have Shadow's Claim by Cressley Cole, The Foxglove King by Hannah Witten, which I DNF'd, and Amanda Bouchette's A Promise of Fire. There's much to ponder here. I think I'm interested in A Promise of Fire, but I also own The Curse of Saints and King of Battle and Blood. So we have so many options. Okay, I will come back to you in a second. Okay, I'm back, and for the most part, I have settled on my TBR. I say for the most part because I'm waffling between the idea of reading 4 or 5 books. I wonder if you guys can guess which ones I'm gonna pick. So one of them, I ended up getting it on Kindle Unlimited, and that was Read Between the Lines. So I settled on Read Between the Lines, which would be a recommendation based off Delilah Green Doesn't Care, which is one of my favorite sapphic romances. And then I decided that I really wanted to read It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. I've never read anything by Tessa Bailey. This is supposed to be the recommendation based off Part of Your World, which is one of my favorite romances last year. So I'm really excited to test this one out. I know that a couple of my friends actually really love this book. Then I chose The Bear and the Nightingale, which this was actually in my unhaul closet. So I'm kind of excited to have picked this one because I've had it on my TBR for so long and I just never think of it. I never get around to reading it. So the fact that it was in the unhaul closet and it was one of the recommendations, I just had to choose it. And funny enough, this was a recommendation based off of the Farseer trilogy. So I'm excited to see why it was recommended because I can't, so far in my mind, I can't figure out this comparison. And then lastly, I chose The Ruin of Kings because this is actually on my 24 and 24. It's one of my highly anticipated series that I want to get into and finish this year. And I'm just so excited to dive into it. And I actually had planned to start it in January with some of my patrons anyway. So this is actually like perfect timing. And this is supposed to be a recommendation based off of Jade City, which is also one of my all-time favorite fantasy series. So I'm really excited. A bunch of my patrons actually did read this last year throughout the year and loved it. So I cannot wait to pick this up. This will probably be the first one that I read in this vlog because I'm supposed to be starting it in a couple of days actually. With that being said, let's go start Ruin of Kings. Hello, my friends. I love this new chair. Anyway, hi, it's Friday. And if you know anything about my Fridays, in typical Stephanie fashion, I normally get shit done on Fridays. I will clean the house in the morning. I will go run errands that I need to run. And I usually film and edit on Fridays. But there are some Fridays, there are some weekends where I just don't feel like doing anything. And for whatever reason, this week just was exhausting for me and I can't really pinpoint why. It is a duvet day, or as some people like to call it, a no bones day. Basically, I started my Zelda Tears of the Kingdom journey earlier this week, or maybe over the weekend. Addicted. So I've pretty much been playing that all morning. I did start laundry. That is the productive part of what I did, but mainly I've just been playing Zelda. I ordered out some lunch and I've been listening to It Happened One Summer and I ended up finishing this and I loved this. This is a controversial / brave thing I'm about to say, but beach read. We all know it. Some of us love it, by Emily Henry. That was Emily Henry's, like, I think debut adult novel, and what I wanted out of it was what this book gave me. So I enjoyed beach read, but this was what I was expecting out of beach read. And to take this book one step further, it is about Alexis Rose from Schitt's Creek, and Schitt's Creek is one of my all-time favorite shows. I've rewatched it probably like 10 times. I really, really love it, and I really love Alexis's character arc in that show. And so it was really fun to have a character modeled after Alexis from Schitt's Creek, and to kind of have not the same arc in the show, but had a really nice, lovely arc in this book, just like the show. I think that in ways Alexis's character is really nailed with Piper, our main character in here, and then other ways Piper is her own character as well. And it's not just an Alexis ripoff, but Alexis is very much there. The spirit of Alexis is alive in Piper. So you may remember that the reason I was reading this one in particular is because it came up as a suggestion for Part of Your World, which is one of my favorite romances from last year. It really made me realize, besides Mariana Zapata, it made me realize how much I love small town romances. But further, it also made me realize how much I love quirky, funny side characters in this small town that has kind of a personality of its own. And I think, funny enough, Part of Your World and It Happened One Summer are very similar in, I guess, archetype, because in both of these, a main character lives in the big city and they end up in a small town falling in love with a man from a small town. It also follows the archetype in the sense that, like, the characters do come alive in this, and a lot of them are funny and they're nice, but it is very much focused on this couple rather than anything happening in the town. But Piper and Alexis from Part of Your World are both kind of going through these really big growing moments in their lives. So ultimately, I do think that this is a really great suggestion for if you liked Part of Your World, especially because they are different enough where it doesn't feel like you're reading the same book over, but they have enough similarities of the things that you'll probably love from Part of Your World will be in It Happened One Summer, and vice versa. So I definitely think that if you liked one, you will like the other. And I for sure loved this one. So like I said, It Happens One Summer follows Piper, and in the very beginning of this book, she throws this massive party because she was broken up with and it was very embarrassing, and she just wants to take her mind off of it. So she kind of becomes irrational, throws this party, and gets arrested. And so her sister bails her out of jail. Their stepdad is very upset about it because he's like, I wanted Piper to learn a lesson. How is she learning a lesson if you just bail her out every time? She has an inherited bar in this small town of Westport, Washington, where her real dad is from, and her real dad actually passed away many years ago. So she doesn't really know her dad. She doesn't know anything about Westport, but she just knows she has to pack her bags and go there to kind of learn a lesson. Her little sister Hannah decides that she doesn't want Piper to go on her own, so they end up going together. And just like in Schitt's Creek, they make a huge entrance and a huge bad impression on the town and slowly start to build their way into the hearts of the town people. And one of those townspeople is Brendan, and Brendan is a fisherman. That's kind of his life. He's very routine oriented, a lot of that having to do with like keeping people alive on these fishing vessels because their job is extremely dangerous. So his first impression of Piper is just not great. He's like, this woman is coming in here disrupting all of these things that I know and are normal to me, and she's making me feel feelings because I find her attractive. And he is so grumpy, but they end up just interacting enough to where they start to kind of fall for each other. And it's a very, very sweet romance. I really enjoyed their romance. Further, I just really enjoyed Piper getting to know her father through different characters in this book and through different aspects of this town that he grew up in. Because he died so young, Piper never really felt like their father was a real person to her. And so being in this town has kind of brought that to life. And her mother never really wanted to talk about her father, never really wanted to address his death and that grief. And so Piper is kind of going through this whole kind of shock of finding out things about her father and just kind of trying to navigate that grief. So I really loved this book. I liked pretty much all of the elements of it, but I think the reason this isn't a 5 stars and it's more of like a 4 or 4.5, I think I'm kind of settling on a 4.5, is mainly because there are some unresolved things for me. There is supposed to be a second book in the series, which is about the sister, and I'm wondering, because I have been told that this particular romance series, which I think it's only a duology, it's best to read it in publication order. And so I'm wondering if it's because the things that are unresolved for me currently will be resolved in the next one, and it's mainly about about the father and the mother. So I really am hoping that the second one resolves that, and that'll probably change my feelings on this book. But as a standalone book, if you were just reading this, because it obviously can be read as a standalone, there are some unresolved things for me as a reader that I wanted to get to know, because it felt like we were exploring it so much in here, and then we don't really get that conflict or resolution to that conflict. So I'm hoping we see that in the second book. I'll definitely be picking up the second book. I don't know when that's gonna happen, but I will be picking it up. So far, Novelist is really doing its job, because this was a great recommendation. Like, I can't really even think of another book that I feel comes as close to Part of Your World in terms of themes, characters, what you get out of those books, sort of the archetypes. So I'm really excited to pick up the rest of these. And as a matter of fact, I have actually picked up The Ruin of Kings. It's not in here, but I picked up The Ruin of Kings earlier this week, and I have slowly been making my way through it, because it's one of those books that's confusing. So I have been physically reading and listening to it at the same time, and just when I have moments of doing that, I pick it up. And so I think this one will probably be the one I finish last. Despite today being a duvet day, it also is a playing Zelda day, so I would like another audiobook. I think I want to move on to another fantasy, simply because I'd like to break up the fantasy and the romance. So I think I might be starting The Bear and the Nightingale. I still want to be a little bit productive, only because I had a lot of chores to do this weekend, and I'm fine doing it tomorrow, but I also want to film and edit tomorrow since I'm not going to do it today. So Erin sent me this video earlier today where somebody set an hour timer, and they could get as much cleaning done in that hour as they wanted, but then after that hour they got to go back to resting. So I think I'm gonna set my timer for an hour, and I'm gonna try to get as much cleaning done as possible in that hour and then call it good. 'Cause baby, like, ooh, it's all another flower lay. The sun goes around the state. Can't wait for the long day. 'Cause baby, like, ooh, it's all another flower lay. The sun goes around the state. Can't wait for the long day. In the sun when I found you, the one you call. You got what I need, and you always be turning my sky blue. But maybe I can't get to you, so why don't you come to stay? 'Cause baby, like, ooh. I have roughly 4 minutes left, so I'm gonna scoop the litter box, which I'm gonna spare you that footage, and then I'm gonna go back to playing Zelda for the rest of the day. As you may know, I was supposed to pick up The Bear and the Nightingale, and I did. And this is Novelist's recommendation for those who like The Assassin's Apprentice or the Farseer trilogy in general. I've been kind of hesitant about this book in general, simply because I don't always bode very well with like historical folklore-y fantasy. It doesn't always work for me, and it wasn't working for me in here. So I ended up getting like 10% into this book, and I just was absolutely not interested in anything that was going on. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm the problem, but I wanted to check in with a few people. So I asked Erin about her experience reading it, and then I asked some patrons about their experience reading it, and we all kind of agreed that I just needed to DNF it. So I will be DNFing this. In terms of the recommendation itself, obviously I only got 10% in, so I can't fully say why I think this is recommended if you like the Farseer trilogy. But the only thing that I could really think of is that this does follow a younger protagonist, and we do get to see her go through a lot of trials and tribulations. If you know anything about the Farseer trilogy, we follow Fitz for many years throughout the realm of the Elderlings, and he has gone through many trials and tribulations. But specifically in the Farseer trilogy, we meet him at the age of 6, and then I think the trilogy ends by the time he's like 19. I can see that comparatively we're following the journey of a young protagonist. I also think that the setting itself, wintry, cold, that setting is very familiar in the Buckkeep Castle, which is one of the settings in the Farseer trilogy. To me, the Farseer trilogy is a cold, wintry type of read for some reason. I've always pictured it this way. So I think there is some comparison to be had for this book and the Farseer trilogy, but not necessarily what I was looking for. So for the sake of actually reading a book that I feel will really give me what the Farseer trilogy gave me, or at the very least be something I completely understand why it was recommended, I'm gonna pick up Dragonsbane by Barbara Hambly. So for this one though, I do think we are not following a younger protagonist. I do think we are following somebody in her 30s. I think she's a sorceress and she has relations to this man named John, who's the only living person to have slayed a dragon successfully, and the kingdom needs him to slay another dragon. That is the little bit I know from the synopsis. I also wanted to pick this one because I think the other thing that is really important here is that Robin Hobb started publishing the Farseer trilogies in the late 80s, early 90s, and Barbara Hambly was also a fantasy writer in the 80s and 90s. So Dragonsbane was published in 1985. So I feel like picking a book that not only compares in terms of content, obviously that's kind of the point of the recommendation, but I also think it's important to take into consideration like when these books were published, because Robin Hobb, I think, maybe was a little bit more progressive for the time in which she was publishing, especially some of the topics and the themes that she touches on throughout the series. I feel like it was a little more progressive than what you were seeing published at that time. We're gonna read Dragonsbane now. So I'm still getting over a really bad cough. So I'm like dying. I'm so excited to report that I really loved Dragonsbane, and I completely see why it was recommended. I think this was exactly the book that I was envisioning when I picked Robin Hobb for this challenge. And I think a lot of that does have to do with the time frame in which it was published. So I'm glad that I settled on a classic fantasy, especially because I really want to explore more classic fantasy this year anyway. And this was a great start because I'm definitely going to be moving on with this series. Dragonsbane follows kind of 3 characters, but our central character is Jenny. And like I said before, she's a sorceress and she's about in her mid-30s, I believe they said at the beginning of this book. And she is in this interesting relationship where she's not exactly married, but she has children and she's committed to John. And John is the only living Dragonsbane in the area. And a Dragonsbane is actually somebody who slayed a dragon. And they have sort of a marriage, but like because of who she is, because of the fact that she's a sorceress and the nature of sorceresses in this world kind of means that they're free and they don't commit themselves to families and the traditional mindset of families. She sort of leaves her kids and John for lengths of time to go study her sorcery. And so one day, which is at the very beginning of this book, she runs into a man named Gareth. And Gareth has braved the far winterlands to find John, the Dragonsbane, because another dragon has infiltrated the kingdom and they need him to slay this dragon. And when Gareth sort of comes across the winterlands and he meets John, he's kind of disappointed by what he sees. He's grown up with a lot of tales and folklore and songs about the Dragonsbane and how they're extremely heroic and just these really strong men that you want to aspire to be. And when he meets John, John wears glasses and he's just kind of down in the dirt with all of the other people. He doesn't really care about titles. He's just trying to survive in the Winterlands because the Winterlands is a really hard place to survive and they haven't been having a good year for crops and survival, basically. So he's just kind of down in the muck, like trying to make things work for all of the people of the Winterlands. And Gareth is really taken aback by it because not only is he not what he envisioned, John also is not extremely proud of being a Dragonsbane. And he even says when Gareth brings him this opportunity to slay another dragon that it's impossible for him to do that unless he tries to trick the dragon, because he's convinced that if he has to face another dragon, he will die, and he almost died facing the first dragon. But Gareth has a very enticing offer because he says that the king will help the Winterlands thrive if John goes on this journey to slay the dragon. And John agrees because what choice does he have, really? And he asks Jenny to go along with him because Jenny kind of specializes in healing, and they go on this journey to the kingdom, to the capital. And on their journey, you find out a lot of interesting tidbits about Gareth and a lot of the things that he's hiding. And you also find out that there is a sorceress in the kingdom, and she is possibly putting people under her spell. There may be a lot of people under her spell and they're not sure what her end game is. So yes, there is a dragon, but there's also this sorceress. And Jenny and John end up going on this pretty intense and extensive journey to slay a dragon and potentially slay an evil sorceress. And I loved it. I ended up giving this a 4 stars. It definitely didn't give me like those 5-star feelings, but I do think that I could really enjoy the series as a whole and potentially give the whole series a 5 stars. And it was very reminiscent of Robin Hobb in ways, but I will say right off the bat, before we even get into did I think this was a good recommendation, no one will ever be Robin Hobb for me. No one will. Robin Hobb just writes in a particular way, creates characters in a particular way that is extremely compelling for me. And honestly, I've never been so attached to 2 characters, which Fitz and the Fool. There will never be another Fitz and the Fool. So I just want to say that right off the bat, because if you are like me and you're searching for that same high as Robin Hobb gives you, or low, I guess, because it's always tragic. But if you're searching for your next Robin Hobb, like someone to replace the Robin Hobb hole in your heart, it's never gonna happen. Besties, let's just be real. It's never gonna happen. But I think that if you are willing to open your mind to other maybe classic fantasy authors that can do similar things and write compelling characters as well, but that are never gonna live up to your standards of Robin Hobb, then Barbara Hambly, I think she could be the woman for you. I don't know. I don't know you like that, but she could be. I think you get my gist. I do think that this is a good recommendation for if you like Robin Hobb. I especially think because of the time periods in which they are published, it's very interesting to me to see certain themes that I feel were probably not the norm to be talking about. There's a lot of progressive moments in both of these books that honestly I wasn't really expecting, especially in the time frame in which they were published. Robin Hobb, I learned over time that that is how she writes, and she pushes the boundaries, and she continues to push the boundaries in fantasy. Now, she doesn't always get it right, but I do think she always tries to push the boundaries. And I think Barbara Hambly was also pushing the envelope, because the relationship between John and Jenny is very progressive in so many ways. And I think that it was such an interesting dynamic that they had, and that I don't think you would see in a lot of other fantasies specifically written by men in this time period. I also think pacing wise, it's very similar. And I think language wise, it's very similar. But I think the character work is a bit different. I wasn't as attached to Jenny and John, even though I loved them. I really, really enjoyed them as main characters, but I definitely wasn't as attached to them. I will say though, I do appreciate having an older female main character as the protagonist of this book. And maybe that's part of the reason why you fall so deeply for Fitz in the Farseer trilogy, is because you do meet him as a little baby. He's only like 6 years old. And so there is so much more emotion that goes into that than maybe meeting a 30-something-year-old and understanding that she can kind of hold her own and she's a badass, for lack of a better word. So I think there's just a different dynamic in terms of where we're meeting these characters and where they're at in their lives. But nonetheless, I really loved the cast of characters within the story. And I really appreciated John as not only a character, but as the love interest, because he does take a back seat and he doesn't try to overstep with Jenny, and he trusts her in everything that she's doing and that she's going to have his back when he needs it. So I fully loved their dynamic. And then Gareth, being the third character within this dynamic, he's just so funny because he's so naive. He is so naive, and he has a lot of preconceived notions about everything in life, and he's constantly being surprised at those ideas being shattered in front of him page by page. So overall, I do think this is a really great recommendation. I think that if you read this after reading Robin Hobb, this would be extremely reminiscent of Robin Hobb in many ways. Like I said, pacing, writing, structure, it would be there. I also think structurally, it's so similar because of how we're really more focused on character than we are on plot. And that's a huge thing within Robin Hobb books as well, is that it is not plot driven, and the magic system and the world building is not the forefront of the book. You actually learn a lot of the world building and the magic system with our characters. And I feel the same way about Dragon's Bane, although I do think that the magic system is a little more important here than in Robin Hobb's books, but overall characters are kind of the forefront. So I do think this was a really great recommendation, but like I said, besties, nothing is ever gonna fill that hole, and we just need therapy. We need therapy. Hello. I look an absolute mess, but it's because I'm cleaning the house and this is like my first day not being sick. I slept through the night. I'm unstoppable. The world's not ready for me. So I started to read between the lines. As you know, this is the comp for Delilah Green Doesn't Care. I don't know if I like the writing that much. Like the writing, it's fine, but I think because of the way that I'm not connecting to the writing, I'm also not connecting to the characters very much so far, but the concept of this is cute. As a matter of fact, it actually reminds me so much of Mistletoe Motive. It has such a similar premise and like kind of a setup. So the reason this has such a similar setup is because our main character owns a bookstore and she is on the brink of getting evicted from this bookstore. On top of that, the two main characters, who are the love interests, they actually know each other online, but they don't know that they know each other exactly online, and they choose to meet up. And it kind of goes a little bit disastrously, but then they try to give each other a chance. That is so similar to the setup in Mistletoe Motive, if you've read it. Basically, the two characters like know each other online, but don't know that that's who they know online. Trust me, it's just very similar. So I'm actually enjoying it because of those aspects more than liking it because it reminds me of Delilah Green Doesn't Care. Actually, it like doesn't really remind me of Delilah Green Doesn't Care, apart from the fact that it's a sapphic romance, and there's definitely a cast of characters that are like found family vibes. So I can see those two things right now, but I'm gonna continue reading and giving this a chance to see if I fall in love with it a little bit more by the end. But I only have 2 hours left of the audiobook. But I'm gonna continue getting my life together and doing laundry and like trying to recover. Hello, I don't know if you care about clothes. I don't know if you care about a clothing haul, but a package just arrived. And I also literally just finished my book like 5 minutes before that package arrived. So I was like, let's just give them a show. Let's give them a show. I had to get some new work pants because I hate wearing slacks, but we have to wear like business casual. So I've been trying to get a lot of fun kind of business casual clothing for work. And so I needed a few new pairs of pants. And I ended up getting 3, but only 2 of them showed up today. And then I ended up getting like 3 cute shirts. First shirt that I got was this ribbed, like kind of cropped, I guess you would call it like a mock turtleneck type of shirt. I really love these under jackets and cardigans and stuff, especially in the summertime because I work in an office. Like I work in the library, but it's basically an office and it's usually freezing in the summertime, so I like having layers so that when I go outside I'm not melting. But I really love, you can probably tell, I really love like the rust and brown colors, so I got one of those. Speaking of rust and brown colors, that's one of the pants that I got. They're like the sailor jeans, but I love just fun little pants where it's not just like boring slacks. Not that all slacks are boring, you can definitely make them really fun, but the ones that I find I just don't feel comfortable in them, I don't really enjoy them. But I love these fun pants that are business casual and I can get away with still feeling comfortable but feeling fun, fresh, cute. I love these. I actually have a couple pairs of these, which is why I got these online and not in the store, because I have a couple pairs so I know what size fits me, because there is no way that I can buy pants offline without at least knowing something about the store and my sizing in that store. And then I got these sweaters, these 2 sweaters. I got a black one and like a gray one. And I don't even know if I would wear these to work, but I'm just excited about them in general because I love the cut of it. So it's this. They don't look as nice like without being on your body, but on the model, they look so cute and it's so flattering. So I got 2 of these. I got the brown one and a black one. Was that a mistake? Possibly, but I got it. Here's the black one. It's, you can't tell. And then the second pair of pants I got actually wasn't for work. I just got them because I've been trying to find a light wash pair of jeans. So I got some mom jeans that are like this color, but I like the way that these pants fit. So I'm excited about that. I don't really shop much anymore because I hate trying on clothes and I hate trying to fit my body into things. So that's what I got, and hopefully I like it all on me. I'll try it on after this. But I did want to update because I finished Read Between the Lines, and it's kind of the same feeling that I had at the beginning, where I never fell in love with these characters. I never really fell in love with this romance, and I think it all came down to not really vibing with the writing, I guess. Like, the writing wasn't bad, it was just very average. So basically we're following two characters. We're following Rosie, and Rosie is a bookstore owner. She inherited her bookstore from her mother, who passed away, and she is very passionate about romance books, especially sapphic romance books, and she's just passionate overall about book selling and her bookstore and like customers and making people happy with reading. But at the beginning of the book, she is served an eviction notice because it seems like they're going to be selling the properties that her bookstore currently is located in. And so throughout the story, she's basically scrambling to either keep the property or to find a better property within her budget. Meanwhile, online, she kind of has this flirtation with an anonymous author. This author has published many sapphic romance books, but she doesn't really want her identity to be known. So Rosie actually has no clue who she's really talking to. So Jane is that author. She is the anonymous author who is talking to Rosie, but at the same time, she actually doesn't know Rosie is the bookstore owner and the person that she evicted from her bookstore. And Jane feels awful about what she has to do, especially as a book lover and a writer herself, but she really has no choice or say in the matter because it's her parents' business. To make matters worse, Rosie in her online persona asks Jane in her online persona if they could meet up, and Jane says yes. And it's a disaster. And so there is a romance that happens. They have an attraction to each other, and obviously over time they build some romance. I feel like my biggest issue, aside from the writing, is also the lack of tension, because Rosie and Jane already have an established relationship online that we didn't get to see forming. There's a lot of context missing for us as the reader. It kind of just feels insta-lovey, even though in my mind, in my heart, I know that it's not insta-lovey because they have built this relationship over, I think it's a couple of years. So like, obviously it's not insta-lovey. They have a background, but because we're not privy to it, it's so hard for me to be invested. And like, I liked them as characters and they were cute together and I wanted to root for them, but I overall just had that feeling of like, I don't care. The tension surrounding the bookstore was also kind of weirdly done, but that really was the least of my problems. I just think it was so much to do with the writing, not really feeling connected to the characters. I could have put the writing issues I had aside as well if the author had chosen not to have sort of a pre-established relationship before Rosie and Jane have met. But sadly, those two things were kind of working against it. Overall, it's cute. If you like bookstore romances, maybe check it out, especially if you enjoyed Mistletoe Motive and you like the formula of Mistletoe Motive, you might like this. I'm not saying that they're exactly alike. I prefer Mistletoe Motive over this book. In terms of why I think novelists chose this book as a recommendation, I genuinely think it comes down to three things. It is kind of rom-com-y, although rom-com I use loosely because I think that most books that are said to be rom-coms are not that funny, but I don't laugh a lot when I'm reading, so it could just be me. But it definitely has that vibe. It has that like wanting to be a rom-com-y vibe, which I think that Delilah Green also has. I think also this has those themes of some family drama because as the story goes on, we do get to see some family drama between Jane and her family not really wanting her to be an author because they don't really think it's a worthwhile career, but also Rosie lost her mother at the age of 23 and this bookstore is like one of her last ties to her mother. And in Delilah Green Doesn't Care, there's a lot of family drama as well. There is the grief and dealing with the death of a parent in Delilah Green, and there's a lot of family issues that they are trying to work out in this story. And lastly, I think is because both Delilah Green and Read Between the Lines are very bookish. Read Between the Lines is a bit more bookish because it mainly takes place in a bookstore surrounding the bookstore, but in Delilah Green Doesn't Care, Claire is a bookseller as well, and so we do get to see her life as a bookseller and inside the bookstore, so it does have all of those similar elements. So in terms of do I think it's a good recommendation? Yeah, because I think it has pretty similar themes if you break it down that way. Do I think that if you liked Delilah Green, you're going to absolutely love Read Between the Lines? No. I really think that the characters are done better in Delilah Green than Read Between the Lines. That's also like a personal thing, so. But also, Delilah Green, while I did say that I don't often laugh out loud with these rom-com type books, I actually did laugh out loud at some of Delilah Green Doesn't Care, so
you know, take that as you will. I think one of the other things, I guess there are 4 things, because one of the other things that does work for this book and works for Delilah Green Doesn't Care is it does have that found family trope to it as well, especially on Rosie's end, which in Delilah Green, Claire was the one who was kind of like Rosie, because Rosie and Claire both have these kind of found families within their friendship groups, and Delilah and Jane are sort of loners in some ways. Like they don't have really great established friendship groups, and they're sort of coming into these friendship groups and making their own found family from these friendship groups and this romance as well. So that theme also checks out as well. So I do think that overall this was a really great recommendation, but it just didn't work for me the same way. And I think obviously that comes down to writing. Thematically, yeah, it's a pretty good recommendation. I'll give it that.
Okay, so I'm in the middle of reading The Rune of Kings, and I'm roughly halfway. I love this book. So essentially you meet 2 characters. You meet Kieran and Talon, and Kieran is in prison. We don't really know why, and Talon is kind of watching over him. She says, "I'm bored, tell me a story." And the story happens to be essentially the story of how Kieran got to the position he's in currently. Now again, this is told in such an interesting way because the chapters go back and forth between Talon and Kieran, so the timelines go back and forth between his age. And I think that is meant to kind of make you a little bit confused, because the whole crux of this book, I think, is confusion. I want to read the synopsis because I think the synopsis does a fairly good job of saying or summing up this book, I guess. Kieran grew up in the slums of Ker, a thief and a minstrel's son raised on tales of long-lost princes and magnificent quests. When he is claimed against his will as the missing son of the treasonous prince, Kieran finds himself at the mercy of his new family's ruthless power plays and political ambitions. Practically a prisoner, Kieran discovers that being a long-lost prince is nothing like what the storybooks have promised. The storybooks lied about a lot of other things too. Dragons, demons, gods, prophecies, true love, and how the hero always wins. Then again, maybe he isn't the hero after all. For Kieran, it's not destiny to save the empire. He is destined to destroy it. I really like that synopsis. I think that really encompasses what is happening here, because in these 2 timelines, you basically get to see time and time again where Kieran's ideas of the world get shifted drastically because of other people's actions or just the circumstances that he finds himself in. And his circumstances are often dire. He never really has the greatest of circumstances throughout the story so far. I can't see it getting any better, but I love all of the elements that are happening here. I mean, halfway through, we've already seen so many fantastical creatures. We've seen so many interesting plot points, lots of twists and turns, and I can only imagine that the later half of this book is probably going to have even more twists and turns. But I will say that this is one of those books that I've immersion read, where I've listened to the audiobook and read it at the same time, simply because it is very hard to keep track of everything all the time. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend just the audiobook. But that being said, even though there's a lot of confusion here, I was nervous going into this based on reviews that the writing would be really convoluted in terms of like the language. And I have actually been pleasantly surprised that the language is really easy to get into. It's not hard to understand the writing. It's not convoluted. It's not like purpley. It's more so the world building and the connections to characters and just these 2 timelines being different. And you're kind of trying to piece them together a little bit. I do wonder what the story would have looked like if the chapters, the interspersed chapters, were in parts. So maybe if you got part 1 as Talon's story, since it's the younger years of Kieran's life, and then part 2 being Kieran's story. Either way, I'm still enjoying it. I actually like the way that it's set up. I don't hate it, and I'm really, really enjoying the narration style. We have finished The Rune of Kings, and also this vlog, technically. I think having as little knowledge as possible going into this book is for the best, because it's just a weird, sometimes convoluted, also very funny and sarcastic, but also brutal and weird time. And I loved it. I just really, really loved it. It's definitely one of the most unique reading experiences I've had in a while. I think a lot of that comes down to the storytelling, which I told you in my last update that this is an alternating timelines, but ultimately it is about our main character, Kieran.
But the one thing I failed to mention is this also has footnotes, and the footnotes is kind of a third POV. So it's another character that we eventually meet, but in the beginning we have no idea who they are. And they interject their thoughts and like corrections to the story as the story is being told. And I think those are the funniest moments. That character is extremely sarcastic and very funny. But Kieran and Talon are also really funny, but they're also extremely morally gray, and I really, really love that. If anything, you could argue that Talon is just a bad. It's just bad. In so many ways, I think that a lot of people will hate this story. I think they will hate how convoluted and confusing it is. I think they will hate the dueling timelines. I think that they'll hate the fact that there are so many twists and turns. Like, you think you know one thing, but you don't. You don't know anything. And you kind of just have to ride it out till the end. But I can see a lot of people not enjoying this. But thankfully, it really worked for me. It was an extremely fun ride. And I read this with my patrons in the Discord, and everybody was having a lot of fun. There were a lot of theories being thrown out, and everyone was kind of on the same page about it just being really confusing, but it's a fun confusion. Well, it was, but I can see people not having fun with that confusion. I absolutely can see that. I think one of the other things that you should know going into this book is that it's very violent, and you could argue that it's gratuitous. So if you don't really love gratuitously violent books just for the sake of kind of shock value, which again, arguably it does happen here. It is for the sake of shock value, and in some cases it is perpetuating the plot forward, but there is gratuitous moments. I do think that if you hate that, you probably won't have the best time with this book. But ultimately, I was so pleasantly surprised that my 5-star prediction kind of came true. I did end up giving it a 4.5, and really that came down to how exhausting some of the twists and reveals became by the end. It's fun, but it kind of became a little bit exhausting because we had been doing that already for like 500 pages. How long is this? Yeah, it's a little over 500 pages, and we were doing these twists and turns for the full 500 pages. So I was a little bit exhausted by constantly thinking that you knew the information and then getting a twist or a reveal that proved you didn't know anything. And so, like, what was the point of knowing the information the first time? So that part really threw me off. Those were exhausting moments, I have to admit. But I loved everything else enough to give it a 4.5, and I'm going to be moving on with the rest of the series. So that being said, as you know, this was recommended because I loved Jade City. Do I think that this is a good recommendation for if you love Jade City? This one is the hardest one for me because on one hand, I can see it a little bit, tiny bit, but on the other hand, I feel like I struggle to find the themes and why you would like Jade City and this book. On the one hand, I do see it in terms of morally gray characters. There's a large cast of characters that you get to know, and there are lots of twists and turns. But on the other hand, I actually don't quite see why you would like one and like the other. Like, I definitely don't think if you loved Jade City, you're gonna love this, or vice versa. And I also think that if you read this first and then went into Jade City expecting The Ruin of Kings, you'd be severely disappointed because the storytelling structure, very different. The twists and turns, different types of twists and turns. I think the twists and turns in the Greenbone saga, it's not like you get fed information that's kind of intentionally wrong to then get a reveal about it. Like, you just get big reveals or deaths throughout the series that maybe you weren't expecting so soon in the series, or maybe you weren't expecting at all, or the way that those deaths come about or the way that those situations come about, you weren't really expecting it. It's very shocking. So I struggle to compare twists and turns because I think they're done and utilized very differently. But if you like books that have a lot of twists and turns and a lot of shocking reveals, you would probably like both of these, sure. Writing style, very different. The family dynamics, very different. I think what's also interesting is magic system wise, Jade City almost has a light magic system. It's more urban fantasy, kind of a light magic system where it doesn't have hard and fast rules that we know about. Whereas in here, not that there are hard and fast rules, but the magic system is much more complex. And arguably you see a lot more mythological or fantastical creatures in here than you would in Jade City because again, it's more of an urban fantasy feel. So again, that's where I struggle too because urban fantasy more on the traditional fantasy side. So yeah, I will say I struggle to see where these connect fully, and I would 100% hesitate to say that if you like one, you are going to like the other. I really don't think that that's the case at all. I think it just happens to be by chance that the Greenbone Saga is one of my favorite fantasy series of all time, and that I've also highly rated this book, but it's not because they are so similar. What is interesting though is that the narrator is the same for both the Greenbone Saga and the Ruin of Kings. Well, one of the narrators. There are multiple narrators in this book. So yeah, I think this one isn't a complete miss in terms of a recommendation, but it's not as easy for me to sit here and tell you that like thematically or how this book is constructed or narrative style, it follows the same conventions as Jade City. But overall, I do think that novelist has done a fantastic job of picking books that have been very similar to one another. I think that 3 out of 4, while it's a small sample size, are pretty great odds. Like, even though, for example, Read Between the Lines was not a complete hit for me, that more so came down to writing rather than themes. And I think that the themes are there. So you could like Delilah Green and you could like Read Between the Lines because they have the same type of themes. Similarly, I think you could like the Farseer trilogy and the Dragon's Bane trilogy. What is that called? I don't remember, but I feel like you could like both of them because thematically they make sense. But obviously the one that was the most successful in terms of recommendation and my enjoyment was It Happened One Summer, which was recommended for Part of Your World. That was like perfection. That was a perfect recommendation for me. Overall, I think Novelist is such a wonderful resource. I use it at work all the time because clearly I can't read everything and I'm more inclined to read specific genres. So when a patron needs a recommendation for like historical fiction or mysteries and thrillers, that is my go-to resource because as we can see, it's pretty good. It's pretty good at recommending books that are similar. And again, the sample size was small. I only picked one off of the recommendations list and we did kind of have a flop with The Bear and the Nightingale. But overall, I think that it is a really great resource to have, and I would say that it probably does a much, much better job than Goodreads recommendations. So yeah, I'm really excited to have shared this resource with you. Hopefully you can find it at your local library if you use your local library and maybe test it out yourself. I would definitely love to do something like this again, and if there are any library resources you want to know more about, let me know in the comments down below and maybe I can make a video about that as well. But otherwise, if you've made it this far and you have nothing else to say, feel free to leave a dragon emoji down below and I will talk to y'all next time. Bye, friends.